Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Welcome to another edition of Musical Talk, the United Kingdom's oldest show business podcast. I'm Thos Ribbits, and I've been wondering if they ever made a sequel to Curtains, whether it might be called Gentlemen Prefer Blinds. Well, we're back with our first edition after our 900th episode last time. And it's another one of our Edinburgh Festival Fringe roundups for this summer in 2025. Last week, you heard songs, many of them, that you could have heard at this summer's Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And it was an absolute treat to hear them all in succession from so many shows that were on this year as part of our 900th episode celebrations. The week before that, you heard a conversation between me and Colm Malloy, regular presenter and composer in his own right, when we discussed our pick of the Fringe for 2025, that's the Real Housewives of the Zombie Apocalypse, and also the show Hole, H-O-L-E exclamation mark, where we shone a light on a place where proverbially the sun doesn't usually shine. Two great shows. And this week we're going to be doing more of the same, because Colm joins me again to discuss a number of shows which we saw at this year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, which we either loved or had something remarkable or interesting about it worth discussing. And whereas in that last discussion episode we only really touched on two shows, today we're going to be looking at a much larger number, and therefore the episode will be more varied. But we are going to be leading and concentrating particularly at the beginning on one show that impressed us very greatly, and that show is The Queen is Mad, written by Amy Claire Tasker and Tom James McGrath, which was one of the best shows that we saw at this year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and which we thought was a 5-star show. And we're going to hear two songs from that score. And you may remember them from last week, because we were able to premiere them as two songs from the newly recorded Edinburgh Festival Fringe original cast recording of The Queen is Mad. They had literally only just become available. And the songs are so good, we're going to play them again today. And those are not just idle words, these songs are brilliant. The song Locked Away was one of the finalists in last year's Styles and Drew Best New Song Prize Awards. And it's also been picked up by Elaine Page on her BBC Radio 2 programme. So in a nutshell, here's what we're going to get today. In just a minute, we're going to hear that freshly minted recording of Locked Away, sung beautifully by Maria Coyne, who played Joanna in the Edinburgh Festival Fringe production this summer of The Queen is Mad. Then we're going to hear that conversation with Colm Malloy and myself as we review and analyse some of the best shows that we saw at this summer's Fringe, and in particular The Queen is Mad. And then afterwards there'll be another song from that show called Disobedience, featuring the entire Edinburgh cast, Maria Coyne, Robert Finlayson and Brian Raftery. And that's this week's episode. Let's hear Locked Away from The Queen is Mad.
All my life I've been told to be meek and shy, not to question why, not to lead but follow. Little girls should be quiet and wives should obey. And despite all the years being shoved aside, all the wounded pride I've been forced to swallow, I refuse to be silenced or do what you say. So it's no wonder that you think I should be locked away. Then you play with my mind, you pretend I'm mad, kill the love we had, contradict and scold me. Then you tell me to trust you and say that you care. Though I used to believe in your twisted lies, your adoring eyes, and all the tables are turning. Try to lock me away if you dare. Now I see how you and my father have tried to control me so you can feel strong. Well, no more. I will not submit to the rules when the rules you've invented are wrong. If you thought that I was a problem before, that my obstinate ways were a crime, then I'll show you how vexing this woman can be. You've shut me up for the last time. There's a fire in my mind that has come alight, burning hot and bright. Now it's growing stronger. You will never contain it, try as you may. You will not hold me back. I will take my throne. I will stand alone. I will wait no longer. This will go down in history, a red letter day. From this moment onward, never again will I be locked away.
Colm,
Thos!
yes, I feel seen, I feel greeted.
Great, as you should.
Thank you. Now, thank you for joining me again to talk about the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2025. We're going to talk about a few more shows that we saw and enjoyed,
Yes.
Or thought had something really interesting going on about them. And we're going to start today with a historical drama, The Queen is Mad.
Yes.
Now, The Queen is Mad, it's actually been around for a year or two now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you know something of its history.
Oh, only in that I know the writers Amy and Tom.
Yeah, who are excellent.
Yeah, they're lovely people, and I think this... I don't know really when it started, but it is, as you say, about a year or 2 years.
And they have a cast recording already.
They do have a cast
from
recording.
a previous London production, I think.
One of their songs, Locked Away, made the Stars and Drew Song of the Year final.
Very good.
So, this show is doing the right things. It's
Yeah.
heading in the right direction. Elaine Page has been singing its praises, not necessarily singing it, but singing its praises. Yeah, and it's so good. I think we both enjoyed ourselves at it.
We did. It was a show that I think is best summed up by the word craft, actually, more than anything else, and which may seem a strange way to enter a discussion about a show which is about a historical figure from real life, but actually it was its very quality which then allowed its qualities to be seen, if that makes any kind of a sense.
Yes.
I think it was nicely written. I think the narrative progresses very sensibly and engagingly and makes sense. It's a serious piece, and the music I think is excellent. Performed live by Tom on the day I saw it, and I think all the time. But what's it about?
Well, it's about Joanna La Loca, as she's colloquially known.
Which is Joanna the Mad.
She was Queen of Castile for a good, 17-year period. Although for a part of that she was locked away, is that correct?
Yes, essentially.
So really, she probably to her, she felt like she wasn't queen for very long because she wasn't able to act on that power.
She was queen in name towards the end.
Yes.
But
it's essentially about how she ascends to she inherits the throne from her father.
Well, she actually inherits the throne from her mother. It's an interest. Her father is the king of Aragon, and that's Ferdinand, and who we see, and her mother, who we never do, is Isabella, who's the Queen of Castile. They're married, so it's a kind of joint kingdom. But when Isabella dies, Ferdinand remains king of Aragon, but because of a number of unfortunate deaths in the family, Joanna inherits the throne for Castile, and therefore is at the same level as her father, who history has handed down as a bit of a rotter. He's one of the architects of the Spanish Inquisition, and was aggressively pious to the point of putting heretics to death, and is played as the villain of the piece, if you want to see him as the villain of the piece, but certainly a mover and shaker and a very successful politician of his period and within his context. I'm not in any way praising him, but no one is a villain in their own story. Yes. But in this story, he is the one who acts most unscrupulously, most selfishly,
And
he's certainly the rotter of the piece.
He's sort of played up in that respect as well. He becomes a recurring character in terms of delivering letters, always with bad news, and always signing them off in a kind of self-aggrandising way.
Oh, yes, it's the light. Yeah, you can.
It's a nice levity to the show.
It is. Yeah, he was saying, "I've got terrible news, Joanna. Your elder sister is dead.
Sincerely, your father, the king,
King Ferdinand of Aragon." Yes, it's a fully declaimed, sung title, isn't it? Like people who write enormous signatures.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good point. Yes, quite, because humour is used very lightly to punctuate the piece, even though it's quite a dark piece. So there's also a great deal of humour to be had from the courtiers. It's a cast of three, and the two male actors play camp Spanish courtiers, who are a very good way of expressing what people are saying about the characters that we're seeing, and therefore by extension what public opinion about those characters is. It's a very neat telegraph of the political context and the social context that this story is playing out in. But it's essentially a triangulation, isn't it, between Ferdinand, who's the father of Joanna, who's a willful woman, sings in her song that she's not afraid to be disobedient, is defiant essentially. We first see her reading a book which has been identified as heretical in her father's presence. So it's very much cocking a snook at her father's position. This is before she's queen, so she's very much a subject at this stage, even though she's the daughter, the third child of King Ferdinand. And then her yearning to escape, which she does by an arranged marriage. Her father arranges a marriage for political reasons with Philip, Archduke of Flanders. And there appears to be a love match by chance at the beginning, but it sours. Now, there's a lovely question about how this sours and who's responsible, but it sours for whatever reason. And of course then there's the dynastic play in place, because she then inherits the throne to Castile, but she won't make Philip he's her consort. He remains Archduke, but he doesn't become king. She does not confer that on him, and of course she's in a joint situation with her father, King Ferdinand, who's still King of Aragon by right, who doesn't want to relinquish any power in Castile, and they have a bad relationship. So that's the dynamic. It's a very, it's a dynastic relationship. It's infused with sourness and hate, because all the characters, by the time that the dynastic part is really playing out, don't like each other. There's intrigue. Public opinion is used and harnessed to achieve a particular end. There is even more skullduggery, to the point of realpolitik. You have King Ferdinand, who's responsible for piety and wiping out heretics and hereticism, but at the same time is quite happy to murder if it's useful for his ambitions. These are nicely drawn characters, richly drawn characters, all from history, of course.
Sure.
But you have to boil that down into a 50-minute slot for Edinburgh. So I thought it very neatly told the story of Joanna's long life, even though her life is episodic in the sense there's big periods of activity and big periods of non-activity.
That's true, and I think the songs actually do very well to help advance the plot, which is, that's a tried and tested method, but it's nice to see it done in a 50-minute show.
Is what we're saying, I think, here, is there's a lot of shows in Edinburgh that don't do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's hard to do. I think one of my favourite moments is there's the song Now I Am Queen, which is after she's become Queen of Castile, where
I'm glad.
She sings her little melody, Now I'm Queen, and then you've got Ferdinand singing his bit. I can't remember specifically what about, but then Philip sings his own bit, and then you have all three of those melodies happening at the same time. And it's a great counterpoint song to just show that all of these things are happening simultaneously
and interconnectedly. Yeah. I mean, the song. If you could see a song, you could see the threads. Yeah. That's a really interesting point, actually. 3 is the magic number in many ways. I mean, it is a 3-handed cast.
Yeah.
And actually to be able to portray a complicated, long-term dynastic struggle over the better part of a century is actually very impressive. Because these characters, we learned that Joanna's 75 when she finally dies. We know that King Ferdinand lasts another 17 years beyond the death of his own wife, and indeed, as part of, after the political situation has resolved itself, for better or for worse. But there are some interesting dynamics in the piece, I think. It's quite rightly can be described, I think, as a feminist narrative. and is all the more refreshing from that. You know, this is taking someone from history who may have been overlooked or forgotten about, who was certainly treated badly by modern contemporary eyes. You know, she played a political game and essentially lost. That is a spoiler, I'm sorry to say, but history has already made that plain. And it's very clear that her being a woman was to her disadvantage. So it's absolutely right that this woman is being reborn in this musical and being placed centre stage, and it's being performed magnificently and with fire by the actor. You know, you can't fault any of the performances at all. All three of them are terrific and absolutely delineate their characters and their emotional journeys and their emotional states in every scene.
Sure.
You know, there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of anger, even in King Ferdinand, he's very angry underneath, but he's a smoulderer in terms of his anger, whereas Joanna is more of a...
She's a firework.
She's a firework, that's a very good term, yes, absolutely. And you know, and that's the lack of temperamental connection really, unfortunately, is their undoing, oddly, because it's an unhealthy parent or daughter relationship. But there is... So it's this feminist story of trying to show how this woman has been wronged, and it's pretty certain she has, and particularly from contemporary eyes, although it has to be remembered that she was a monarch.
Yeah.
And she played the game, and ultimately she was outplayed. But the interesting thing for me here is the flip side to that, is that her principal characteristic is defiance and disobedience, and she has a song to that effect. And it's very clear that is who she is, and it is devil take hindmost. You know, she doesn't mind upsetting her father, King Ferdinand. She doesn't mind upsetting her husband, Philip, the Archduke. She ultimately achieves the crown when her mother dies. But then there is defiance and disobedience directed to her by the other players and, by extension, the court and the peoples involved. That, I think, is really interesting. So you're rooting for Joanna, but at the same time she is being... You know, those who live by the sword die by the sword, or possibly, if you want to look at it in more gender terms, what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. So I think there's a real dynamic pressure there, a real contradiction. Actually, you know, you want Joanna to succeed, even though history tells us that's not what's going to happen. I mean succeed in this case as in to achieve, rather than she does actually succeed to the throne. I don't mean in that constitutional sense. But there is this situation, but it is ironic that the very thing that she exemplifies is the thing that ultimately is her own undoing, at least to a degree.
I think that could be an element of the show that could, if that's harnessed and tapped into even more, could make it really strong. I mean, it's, again, not to say that it's tried and tested, which means it's not worth doing, but the Greeks have been doing it for millennia by giving a character a fatal flaw that propels them but then ultimately undoes them.
It is. It's already there in the writing. It just, I agree with you, a little bit of pointing towards it. I think, you know, I call it the push me pull you tension.
Yeah, I think that's what makes all good drama gripping. And
Yes.
I think this isn't to put the show down, because I think we
In
did
no
enjoy
way.
it, but it does maybe touch on a bit of the despair at points where you go, there is an element of hopelessness in this story, so what are we to do as an audience? Are we watching we're watching a tragedy that we can't stop?
And you know, that's really interesting, because I think this is a problem with any show, any musical, but any show that is about a real person. Because real people are very rarely 100% fascinating for every living second of their life. And certainly when you're looking at them after their death, they're usually active in the first half of their life much more than they are in the second half of their life, usually. It's not always the case. Queen Victoria's got a big dead point right in the middle.
Yeah.
You know, active at the beginning, active at the end, but, you know, with the morning years, you might call them, that's very different. But for most people, there may not be enough story to make two acts, as it were. Now, obviously, this is a 50-minute version for Edinburgh, slightly cut down, I believe. But the longer version's an hour and 15 or an hour and a half, something of that nature, I believe. Where do you go when the story arc is already delineated? You know, it's clear, I suspect, to anyone who... I'd never heard of Joanna the Mad, even though she turns out to be Catherine of Aragon's older sister.
Yeah.
So, in a British context, we know her as... Well, the thing that I hadn't realised is that Ferdinand of Aragon is the father-in-law of Henry VIII. You know, he's the father of...
That would make sense.
Yeah, Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon's father.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that suddenly ties it into a time zone for us in this country, you know, because everyone knows Henry VIII. And he's had musicals written about him, and one of them is called Rex, and the other one is called Six. So you've got to finish it with an X. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose you could do a musical about Henry VIII called Sex, actually, but combine the two. because he wasn't a verse, was he? So anyway, but I'd never heard of her. But she's playing at a similar time, as it were. She's just doing it in Spain, or the kingdoms of Spain that are, going to be forming the Spanish Empire. I thought that was, but her arc is told. It's sort of clear from the title, Joanna the Mad, and if you read the blurb, what's going to happen to her? She's going to be undone by men. And so the story...
I think there's a way through, though, because I think, I don't know what it is, but we know that there are musicals about other historical figures, but it's about finding the right window of time to tell that story.
That is true. And also how you then deal with the second act. I'm thinking of Sunday in the Park with George, funnily enough, because actually the second act is not really about George at all. Or rather it is, but through a looking glass.
Well, yeah, it kind of is it gets a bit spiritual in a way, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
It's no bad thing, but that's the leap they took when they wrote that.
So sometimes you do have to use Act 2, as it were, figuratively, to reflect on what's happened in a contemporary setting. Now, this is a very contemporary show, although it's set in the 16th century. It feels modern and contemporary, and it's written with a contemporary mindset.
And it has a contemporary bookend.
I'd forgotten that. Yes, exactly right. Yes, we start off in modern-day Spain by a statue.
Looking at a statue.
That's exactly. And the tour guide is telling, as it happens, a British tourist, the story of Joanna. And then it ends with the representation of Joanna at the end in this statue being given the last word, essentially. So it's an incredibly well-crafted piece.
Yeah.
It's incredibly well performed. It would be interesting if it were ever expanded into a 2-act piece, how that would be done. Because you would have to either find more incident in the life or perhaps more resonances that reflect the life.
I do remember I was thinking about this to myself afterwards, and I thought, what would I do if I were to write a second act? And actually, this isn't to suggest to Tom and Amy that they do this, but it's a nice thought experiment anyway, which is I would have Joanna in isolation for those years, and I'd allow her to go into a kind of dream state and see what her subconscious brings to the stage.
That's interesting, yes, absolutely. And also an argument with herself. Or perhaps with representations of the people who are her adversaries.
Figments of her imagination, or flashbacks, or all of those things.
Now, Colm, I just want to pick you up on something you were saying about how the songs do great narrative work. But I was fascinated by something that you and I were talking about when we were in Edinburgh, which is a sort of theory you're sort of developing about perhaps a cultural difference between what might be called the Broadway tradition of making the songs move the narrative and what might be called the European tradition. Do you want to just...
I think it's very much my own working theory. Yeah. I don't think it's... I could probably back it up with evidence, but I don't know.
I appreciate you're still chewing through this at the moment. I was so interested by what you were saying, and you've just been talking about this show.
Yes. What prompted this was me seeing Sense, a musical about dementia is the full title, which is made by a Belgian theatre company, in collaboration with various Alzheimer's dementia organisations, and it tells the story about a family coming together at Christmas, supporting the grandfather character who does have dementia, and it's revealed over the course of the piece that it's a 5-hander. The grandfather's son, so that the father character and his wife and their son all have secrets that they're maybe trying to keep from each other or keep from the grandfather, and it's that's it in a nutshell. What's interesting is that the songs do nothing to propel the narrative along whatsoever. And when this first started, I thought, they've got this completely wrong, the song shouldn't be doing this. But actually, as it was happening, I was reflecting on this, going, well, no, the songs are doing something different, which is that they're not propelling the plot along, but they're also not just rehashing the scene we've just watched. They are taking the emotional peak that the scene has reached, and then that is magnified into a song, as it were. Which is interesting because a few years ago I ended up speaking to a composer called Bob Telson. I can't remember his name. Bob. Anyway, I'm going to go with Bob, who studied in Paris in the 20th century with Nadia Boulanger, who was this contemporary classical composer. She taught loads of people. She taught Charles Strauss. So actually, I've since been trying to think whether there is anything in that with regards to Annie, because I also, it's not necessarily working through, but I think the songs in Annie are not necessarily plot-driven songs. But maybe I'm...
Well, we can talk about Annie in a minute, because I saw it in Edinburgh.
We can. Anyway, all of this is to say, I did speak to him and I asked him about his songwriting process, and he was very frank with me, and he said that he doesn't write plot-driven songs. He said that it's not his forte, and in fact that he thinks the point of songs should be to highlight and amplify an emotional peak that has been reached in a scene or at that point in the show.
So not repeat, but amplify. So
yes,
exactly. This is the point.
It's not rehashing.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I will say, without naming them, we have seen shows in Edinburgh where the songs do double... The songs just reiterate what we've seen in the scene before.
Exactly. So it is the song reflects the drama rather than moving it along or in any way amplifying it. Yeah.
Because I will say, this show, Sense, the scenes were terrific. And there is... I think there is a world in which this is just a play. And it's brilliant. The actors were brilliant as well. It was very compelling.
So it could work if you took the songs out?
It could, but I do wonder if the songs are adding respite, because it is quite heavy, understandably.
Yeah. Although they're amplifying the emotion. Is it just the change of format?
I think it's that, because they're adding relief at the same time. They're adding really a catharsis.
That's
and now we're bringing it back to the Greeks again, and we're bringing it back to Europe. So I think I do have this kind of working theory where I think the European tradition of theatre and of musicals is to halt the plot to highlight a moment, whereas in musicals, in America, or the American style, the songs drive the narrative.
So, I mean, that's really interesting. Yes, songs, let's say, linked narrative as opposed to songs linked to the emotional journey. So one is the factual journey and one's the emotional journey, and they can serve both. I mean, let us be honest. The world of musical theatre is so broad; it all is possible. But there are a lot of people who like to talk about rules and how you do it, and whilst rules, and they're not rules, but they're guidelines or possibilities, are only as good as they're as useful for the piece you're writing.
Sure.
But I really like this, and I think this is something we need to explore more over time.
You look at Kurt Weill.
Those women over there in the corner.
Yeah. Those songs aren't driving the plot along.
No.
Nor are they rehashing something. In fact, sometimes they are almost absurdist. They are providing nothing in relation to what we've seen, or they're telling something completely different.
Well, I can literally say Brechtian dissonance with Weill, can't I?
Yeah.
But funny enough, that's the point, isn't it? It's interesting as well. Funny enough, I was thinking that slightly when you were talking about the scene tells its dramatic point and then the song amplifies the emotional response to that. Therefore, it's doing something different from the narrative. But also, it does give you a Brechtian disconnect because you've gone from drama, in speech marks, to song, in speech marks, in a way that is presumably seamless and yet at the same time is different. So the format is giving you a Brechtian breakdown.
Yeah.
And so to disconnect, to reconnect. And punctuation is so important. Pacing, people talk about pacing in theatre and musical theatre, but they very rarely talk about punctuation. But I genuinely think, and you said respite as well, this all ties in with the same thing, that ability to draw breath, briefly to analyse, briefly to appreciate it, to take a breath and move on with the next bit, because if it's a relentless roller coaster, you can actually lose the detail.
Yeah.
Or, if it's not the detail, you can lose the emotional position, and actually, surely, if drama's about anything, it's working up to an emotional response to something, even if it's the satisfaction of an intellectual way of closing down a plot in a Sherlock Holmes or something like that. There's still an emotional connection with the satisfaction of that. I think your theory is interesting, and I'd like to explore it further.
No, that's the bins. Oh. That's the bins, everyone.
You mentioned Annie.
Yes.
And you're right. Do the songs all serve the plot? Yes and no is the answer to that. Now, I had the great privilege. Charles Strauss, as people will know, I interviewed on a couple of occasions, and he was a man I adored. I really like Charles Strauss, and I've always admired his work, and I've always admired his songs. There's a lot to enjoy in a Charles Strauss song. There's a lot to enjoy in a Charles Strauss musical. I thought, having his passing only a few months ago, this would be the ideal time to see Annie, because there was a full version of Annie up here in Edinburgh. What was particularly interesting to me was the fact that it was advertising itself as being non-mawkish. Okay. And I love the fact that the person who'd been writing the blurb made that point, because a lot of people, I think of Annie as being sentimental. And you can do it sentimentally, and of course it's been made and remade on a number of occasions with greater or lesser degrees of success. But I think at its heart, it is a hard knock life musical. And I use that term deliberately because it is about living, who are some of the most socially dispossessed people in America in the early 1930s in the Depression. They're going to be the poor and the poverty-stricken, and even amongst that group, the orphans.
Yeah.
So Annie is right at the bottom of that tree, of that social tree. She escapes from her horrific orphanage run by Miss Harrigan to a shanty town, and that is considered a step up for her. She's with a group of people who are in a terrible situation, and we also learn it's heading towards Christmas. And then just to really drive that song seems very strange. We'd like to thank you, Herbert Hoover, because it's very bitter. So we've had the intimacy of the bitterness of Miss Harrigan and the disaffection of the children, but she escapes. She gets to the shanty town, and we hear this viciously politically raw song about the former American president, for whom many people blamed not just the crash but the failure to support people after the crash. It took Roosevelt to do something about it, and in fact it is Roosevelt meeting Annie that helps the New Deal come about. It's interesting that the thing pivots from Oliver to a story of national politics. Interestingly,
something of the Brechtian in that.
Something very Brechtian, and I also want to talk about agency in a minute. So, but the song Henry Hoover, we'd like to thank you, Henry Hoover, very bitter, deliciously so, from a group of people we never see again. And you think, well, why is this here? Why have we suddenly done this? Where have we gone here? But what it's actually doing is setting up the political context that we need for Act 2, which is it really drives home the depression and the inhumanity of the depression, because the scene ends with the police breaking up the group singing and destroying their shanty. Not finding them anywhere else to live, but destroying their shanty. This is an inhumane approach to poverty. And then we're given the situation. We have this odd thing where it's made pretty overt that Oliver Warbucks, the tycoon, is a Republican, and President Roosevelt was and is a Democrat in the piece, but they sort of bury the hatchet together to try and help make things better in the 1930s economically in America. So it sets up the political Act 2. But a song taking us back to your theory is You'll Never Fully Dress Without a Smile.
Yeah.
Now, at one level, it ties in thematically with Annie's approach, which is always an optimist.
It's a charm song in a way.
It is, but she's not in that song. She's knocking around with Daddy Warbucks by then. It's the rest of the children in the orphanage, or it was in the version I saw, singing along to the radio with the wonderful Boylan sisters. And fabulous lyrics, by the way. Hey, Dapper Dan, hey, Hobo Man, you've both got your style, but you'll never fully dress without a smile. Your clothes may be Beau Brummely. They stand out a mile, but you'll never fully dress without a smile. Anyways, it's lovely stuff. But so I suppose it does tie in thematically. But it is a respite song, actually, funny enough. But the thing that surprised me most about Annie, and I'm going to be honest, the first time I've seen it on stage in its entirety.
I've never seen it.
Have you not? It's actually worth it.
Its entirety.
But the thing I was getting more than anything else, and I've mentioned him already, Oliver. Oliver starts in an orphanage where he's being badly treated. He's sold, as it happens, but is essentially escaped and goes to a place. Oliver, famously, in Oliver, has very little agency. He is shifted around by people and very rarely does anything himself. He's a very passive character. The London version, which is a fabulous new production, gives him some agency in Act 2. They make him partly instrumental in the resolution relating to Bill Sykes. And that does a lot for that character. It also gives him a journey, actually, which is just, from poverty to riches again, but not just passively. Annie's very interesting. Annie has a very strange journey. Possibly the reverse of that. When we first see Annie, she's not unlike Joanna. She is defiant of Miss Harrigan.
Mm.
She is the one who wants to run away, who is not going to let circumstances get her down. She's going to be optimistic. Joanna is very optimistic. She's always looking to the future. You know, when I marry Archduke Philip, things are going to be better. When I become Queen of Castile, things are going to be better. Annie's got that same optimism. I can get out of this terrible situation into a better situation. I may have to wait, but she does it. She escapes. Now she's captured, she's sent back again. And then something very strange happens. She's sort of picked almost randomly to go and live with Oliver Warbucks over Christmas as a kind of charitable act. It turns out he wants a boy rather than a girl, but they hit it off. And then Act 2 is much more about the political situation, about trying to resolve the depression. And you get a song in the basically the cabinet office of the White House, where President Roosevelt makes his very senior political friends sing a verse of "The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow." I mean, it's utterly ridiculous, but also it is about the infusing optimism. And then Roosevelt has a line which is basically, "We choose to look to the positive," or something like that, which is the theme of the whole piece. But by this stage, Annie is entirely passive. Daddy Warbucks, or Oliver Warbucks, wants to adopt her because they've hit it off so well. She expresses a view that she wants to she wants to find her real parents. So he, at his own expense and his own emotional expense, because he wants to keep her, as it were, as an adopted daughter, advertises, and then a lot of fraudulent people come up and try and claim Annie for the reward which he's offered, including Miss Harrigan's criminal brother and his mole. And it's interesting, actually, you see the shades of grey there, because he's happy to pretend to be Annie's father, and then if he gets hold of her, they're just going to dispose of her. It's very clear that she's for the chop. And Miss Harrigan, interestingly, certainly in the performance we saw, was a bit cautious about that before she comes round. So, there's something redeemable about her potentially. But Annie, Act 2 is all about Oliver Warbucks' secretary, basically, who's clearly running the show, is filtering out all the frauds. Eventually, the Warbucks gets the president to use the FBI to work out who the most likely, work out what's happened to her real parents. They're dead. Spoiler. And also to get one over on the couple who are, Miss Harrigan's brother and partner. Annie doesn't do anything in Act 2. She doesn't do anything at all. She gets what she wants. She becomes, and what Oliver Warbucks wants. But it is Oliver Warbucks using his connections to the FBI, to the President of America, using his extreme wealth, that everything happens in Act 2. The show is much more about Oliver Warbucks. It is his journey from a loveless tycoon to a love-filled life, than Annie, who, after showing a bit of
chutzpah,
in the first half of Act 1, essentially is a bit of flotsam carried around by grown-ups who are deciding her outcomes. She has no agency at all. Now, that in no way diminishes Annie. It's a great show. But it's really odd to me now. I think if it were being written these days, you would have to give Annie some hand in the resolution whereby she is the one who smells fish about the fake parents. And so she inadvertently mentions some fact, which is how she's identified about a broken locket. And she mentions the fact the only other people who know about it, who are not the president and Mr. Warbucks, is Miss Harrigan. And that's when they realise something's up and they can trace it. But that's by accident. She doesn't do that deliberately. She doesn't make a point of it. It's picked up by others. The clocking of it is by other grown-ups, not her. It's such a strange piece. Brilliant, and the songs are fabulous.
They're great.
Particularly Act 1. It's chock full of hits. Even The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow, if it's sung properly, is not sickly sweet.
No.
Particularly in the context in which it's being performed. So I was very impressed by Annie. I think it's I can see why it's a classic. But it is emboldened and enhanced, burnished, I might say, by the score by the late Charles Strauss. He's absolutely on fire in that piece, I think. Yeah. Sorry, that's Annie.
Great.
Well, there's another show that we saw, completely unrelated to the two we've been talking about, is a show called Hot Mess, which is a professional show in Edinburgh.
Yep.
It's a two-hander. One of the cast is from the West End production of Six, one of the cast is from the West End production of Mamma Mia, and they put in faultless performances and sing like angels. So an absolutely cracking show in the sense.
Should have that review on the poster.
But they do. But Hot Mess, would you care to describe the narrative drive of it? Because it's hard to describe a plot.
Essentially it's about the relationship between Earth and humanity, and they're anthropomorphized, so they're people.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
one person, the woman, is Earth, and the man is humanity.
That's right. He's Hugh.
Yes, and Earth is just
Well,
Earth.
he calls her E.
Does he? Okay. And it's a romantic story about how they get on, and then as humanity advances, both in terms of technology and as it develops, really, it seems to drain Earth of her resources, or it also gets bored of Earth at one point, and it decides to go on the journey of space travel.
Yeah.
And it draws parallels between a relationship and the dynamics between that, essentially.
And particularly from a green point of view. The
green point of view, yes.
The ecological argument here is that humanity starts off. This story takes place over millions and billions of years. So we meet Earth exactly at the beginning when she's, as you say, in this personified form, lonely, looking for a relationship.
Well, yes, she's just got rid of the dinosaurs. Well, she hasn't got rid of the dinosaurs, but the dinosaurs have just been.
She's miffed that the dinosaurs didn't come to anything because of the meteorite.
Yes.
And she's
ready to start again.
Yeah. And then she meets Hugh, he's a very affecting lead. He's nerdy, actually. Humanity is portrayed as a sort of nerdy kind of character. Their relationship's a bit sour at the beginning. He's a bit cross with her because she's been flooding his fields and his paddocks, and she then says, "Yours, they're mine."
Yeah.
But they do form a kind of relationship, and it turns out to be quite a good relationship for the first part. But exactly as you say, humanity develops, and as that humanity develops, their relationship gets closer. So he does more irrigation, and the sense that they're working in relative harmony by mutual consent. And then it becomes a little bit more in depth, in the sense that there's a kind of sexual connotation about having coal within her and oil within her, and she's happy for him to plunder that. So she invites him to do so, interestingly, in this telling, which he then does, but of course he does it without too much regard for the future. So he's always looking to the future, but he doesn't plan for the future, seems to be Hugh's weakness as a person. But he's very affable all the time. But of course, as that starts to affect the Earth, plundering of those resources and the pollution and all that kind of stuff, that in turn is matched by the parallel in the souring of their relationship. There's an attempt by Hugh on behalf of humanity to say, right, we'll start doing recycling, which looks like an attempt to save the relationship. But of course, at one level, and this is the point, you can take it as subtly or as unsubtly as you like, it's all lip service. He's not really doing nearly enough, and actually the pollution is continuing until that relationship is soured, and Earth basically says, get off my planet, you're no longer my boyfriend. And that leads us to our denouement, where she has another go with dinosaurs. There's a little bit of sort of a coda at the end where she uses the left behind remnants of humanity's intelligence, which is AI allegedly, to revive dinosaurs. So she's giving them a second go. It's a kind of comedy ending, and humanity is found has to move to another planet, which is clearly less suitable than Earth, but just about sustainable. Although he's already talking.
He's underground.
Yeah, quite a long way, and the voice of the planet is a sort of satanic rather than what, deep and masculine, rather than feminine and welcoming. Gender stereotype, but there we are. So at one level, and funny enough, there is a parallel here with the Queen is Mad story at one level. It is a historical arc. These are not real people, but also it's a historical arc where if you've got any kind of understanding, you're going to see where it's going to go. It's not a surprise how it ends up. The coda is, that's almost a comedy ending, and the lesson he put in speech marks.
Yeah.
It's incredibly affable for the most part. Humanity is not painted as evil. It could have been humanity or evil, but humanity is thoughtless.
Yes.
Thinking in terms of future planning, etc. So it's both It's incredibly competent. It's beautifully performed, isn't it? You know, it looks great, they sound great, the performers are both terrific. You can't fault them at all and don't want to. But the plot is this: how do you represent either a concept or a historical figure? In this case, it's sort of doing both in a way that isn't predictable.
Yeah.
And obviously the point is, look everyone, we're destroying the planet, we need to do something about it. It's not too preachy, actually. I should absolutely give it that. There's a danger of these things being preachy. We've seen a lot of preachy shows over the time, including this year and last. It doesn't preach. It does lead you fairly directly to the point. There's no subplots. So there's a sense of inevitability about it if you have any kind of understanding of the geopolitical situation we find ourselves in. But I'm not sure how one could deal with that. Maybe finishing at an earlier point or at a later point again. I don't know. I don't have a solution to that. But there is its great success is also its weakness.
I think what I struggled with was putting humanity on Earth on equal footing and suggesting that they are equal partners in a relationship, whereas my worldview, pun intended, is that I think humanity's relationship with Earth is more like a parent-child, in that Earth is like a host for humanity, and humanity drains the resources in the way that a baby will feed off of a mother in the womb prior to birth, and then from the moment it's born it wants more, and as it's growing up and as it gets older and it's a teenager, it's still demanding more and it's being hostile. And I think, but again, that's not to put this show down, but I think that's the challenge I found with it, is that it actually doesn't jive with how I view that dynamic.
Well, I tell you what, this is where it's similar to Six then. It has a really good gimmick. The idea of the Earth and humanity being boyfriend and girlfriend is a wonderful gimmick, but it doesn't necessarily hold up to the end narratively. I really like your idea of Earth being the mother. It would be a very different relationship.
Mother Earth.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Gaia, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned how children sort of take resources even from the womb. In this case, that would be a womb with a hue. Thank you, Noel Coward. But it is... I think that's an interesting dynamic. I think that's the problem. You know, we're so used to what a relationship story is. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl. In this case, boy doesn't get girl back again. But we're used to the thrust of that. And it does work as a backdrop, if you like, for the story they're trying to tell, or the point they are trying to make. I think it is a show that's trying to make a point.
I think unless maybe if the relationship had more of an imbalance, but I appreciate that might make the tone a bit darker.
Yeah,
but maybe it could be achieved that way. I don't know.
Also, it's you know, the one thing I do like about it very much in terms of its narrative is that Hugh's characteristic is he's not. He's inadvertently rapacious of her resources, the planet's resources, but it's not sexual, even though the relationship is clearly a speech marks by parallel a sexual one.
Yeah. Symbiotic in a way.
Yeah, symbiotic's a better term, except it isn't, is it? Because she's suffering. But yeah, I mean, this is going to sound like damning with faint praise. It's really great, but it somehow needs something extra. And I haven't got an idea what that extra is. I like your interpretation. I think that would go a long way. But it would then unfortunately lose the gimmick, which is the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. I should say, it doesn't need us to say anything positive or negative about it, because as I understand, every single ticket for the Edinburgh run has been sold out. Yes, quite. No flyering for them.
Yeah. Makes their job easier.
Yeah. And it was in a big venue. And probably will be in a bigger venue next year. I have no doubt we'll be seeing that at something like Underbelly next year, or the Pleasance Grand, or something like that. It'll be enormous. You know, I can see this show's going somewhere. There's a lot of positivity towards it, and there's nothing we're saying which is negative about it. It is just that I suppose it's so narratively straightforward. That is my, and therefore psychologically straightforward, and you know.
And we know that the course of humanity with Earth is very complex, and there is, I think, there's room to actually expand upon that even more.
To make it more complex, yeah, absolutely.
Also, humanity itself isn't a monolith, and I think there's But then you don't want to ruin the fact that it's a two-hander, but the fact that humanity splinters off in different directions, that could be a way for you to show that the real peaks and troughs in the journey with humanity and Earth.
There was also I must say, I was very taken by the fact that one of the final straws for Earth, because it's she who brings the relationship to an end, is going to the moon in 1969.
Yeah.
She is severely peed off about that. And it's played as though, actually, we get to hear a telephone not being put down at the right point, which makes it sound like humanity is flirting with the moon at the expense of Earth, which of course is not a fair representation. No one's going to the moon with the expectation of living there, but it makes for a nice conceit, particularly in the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship.
Sure.
But it does sort of paint humanity as being in the wrong on that point, when actually, going to the moon is one of the great achievements of mankind. Or humankind, I should say. And it's interesting, it's painted as a negative here, partly for comic effect, partly for dramatic effect. That is the turning point, I would argue, or certainly very much near it. Or that then brings the argument about, shall we recycle, which is then not adhered to. It's such an interesting piece, but not without its flaws, and yet also clearly excellent and much appreciated.
Yeah.
Well, couple of things. Let's gallop through 2 or 3 very quickly. There was one called I Was a Teenage She-Devil, which is a rock version of Faust set in the 1980s, essentially, which we both saw, but separately.
Yes.
Quite accomplished in its way.
I really enjoyed it.
The thing that I left with, however, it takes the Faust story, but then the character who makes the deal with the devil, a redemption is found for that character, which is not in itself a bad thing narratively. It takes it away from the original piece, but that's, i.e. Dr. Faustus. But it's absolutely fine if you can make that work. Interestingly, in this piece, when this undertrodden character, and it's set in a 1980s American school, and she's being bullied, our principal character is a bullied girl in the school who's a nerd and plays the recorder, and of course the cheerleaders pick on her and things like that. So far, so High School Musical. But when she makes a deal with the devil, first of all, she becomes sexually predatory,
Yes.
and there's nothing wrong with that. But she then goes on a murderous spree. And the reason she does that is because there's an extra element to the plot whereby the devil is using the character not just to give her wishes for her soul, but also that she's bidden to do his work to get more souls so that he can take over the world.
Yes. Or become a kind of a living entity on Earth.
Yes, exactly. That's the manifest. But that means that to beat the devil, you have to allow the character to survive, the Faust character, the Dr. Faustus character to survive. But she has so firmly taken the devil's hand in the sense that she goes around murdering people. 3 people at least are killed by her hand.
Yes.
One person explodes in a dance-off, which, who hasn't that happened to? But she has sex with someone in a bed and then kills him. And then there's another chap that who's a jock, well, they're both jocks, that she finishes off. Now, at the point of redemption, she's redeemed by the love of a good woman, but this woman has been loving her all the way through, so it's not a new point in the plot. But I was left with a slightly interesting feeling of dissatisfaction, which was, I'm not trying to be critical, I enjoyed the piece a great deal, but the woman who makes the deal with the devil is redeemed at no expense, even though she's murdered 3 people, whereas ironically the people who are painted as bad, the jocks and the cheerleaders, are merely bullies. They're terrible, but they're bullies. Nobody dies at their hand. Now, the good news is everyone survives. Everyone who's dead is brought back, and so the clock resets, which
there's a feeling that it's undone, so really it's almost a none of this happened.
Yes.
Do you maybe I almost wonder if because you get the impression that it's not weighing on her conscience, or maybe she's not even aware of that happening, having had happened. I don't know, but
that's possible.
Maybe there's room for her to now live with the prospect of this sense of evil is lurking within me, or I am capable of doing these things, and thank goodness it didn't actually happen. It's almost been like a bit of a dream for her.
Yeah, I was thinking the other way around. I think that I think she should be redeemed, but at a price. So I mean, it would have been interesting if, in the course of her redemption, the person who loves her makes a self-sacrifice or something of that nature, so that actually that is the sacrifice is the greatest thing you can do, but also shows her the path of true love, the path of positivity, and
all along
to renounce the devil. I really enjoyed it though. So it was a great. It was fun and funny and nicely performed with good pop rock songs. But I was just interested in that adaptation of. When I see Dr. Faustus with a happy ending, I always have to think, well, is that earned? That's my question.
Sure.
And very, very briefly, I mentioned it in passing there, but I did see a full version of High School Musical done by an American high school. Very well, actually. I've seen the film. I've seen it on stage once. And, that was 20 years ago now. It's now a nostalgia piece, High School Musical. And it's probably worthwhile Musical Talk revisiting it in full at some stage. But we've been talking on and off in our conversation this week and last about not necessarily spotting things. I didn't spot in Real Housewives of the Zombie Apocalypse all the female characters were being named after Greek goddesses. I can't believe how stupid I am.
I can.
And you'd be right to. But I think it took the stage version rather than the film version to me to realise that we're seeing Romeo and Juliet writ large, because it is the jocks and the high school, the drama club, who don't mix. They are the Montagues and Capulets, the two families that don't get on, the two in school, two groups that don't get on. You've also got the Troy, who's the singer. He's actually a jock, but he wants to sing, so he's putting his finger in the pie, as it were, of the theatre. You've also got the new girl who wants into the theatre, so she's an outsider as well.
Sure.
So it's two outsiders and a relationship which threatens to overthrow the long-term animosities between these non-talking groups, which is amplified by their staff. So the coach and the drama teacher,
yes,
who are extreme versions of those particular stereotypes, also hate each other and argue with each other. So everyone's following the tradition. And of course the show that they're putting on that they're going to put on in the theatre group is the musicalised version of Romeo and Juliet by one of the theatre group people who plays the piano. So now normally, and I've said this on Musical Talk before, the musical Bear, which I saw in Edinburgh a few years ago, takes the Romeo and Juliet story and makes the relationship a gay one. Unfortunately, it does it, in my view, in a slightly culturally histrionic way, and therefore once it's decided they're going to do Romeo and Juliet, you know that it's a tragedy and one of these two, if not more, is going to die. And that is exactly what happens. High School Musical, I'm pleased to say, we were talking in the adaptation of Dr. Faustus about redemption and whether it's earned or not. I don't want Troy to die. I don't want any of the characters
to die.
No, they're all charming, actually,
in their own way.
That's exactly right. Even Ryan and Sharpay.
Oh, they're great.
Are great. A greatly drawn couple, absolutely. As brother and sister.
There are a lot of kind of theatre theories about the fact that those are the two main characters and they've been wronged by the kind of opportune sports jock and the newcomer who want to infiltrate and steal their parts that they've rightfully earned because they're seasoned, theatre people.
Yeah, their group's being invaded by others.
Yes.
Yeah, and
who just want to fall in love with each other.
Yeah, but also take the best roles.
Sure.
Yeah. There's a great theory that it does need unpacking.
Yeah.
And I think the stage play does this better. The musical does it better on stage than it does in the film version. I never got any of this. But it is the exception. They're doing Romeo and Juliet, and fortunately everyone comes out happily. And in this case, I think it's deserved. The tenor and the tone of the piece works. But that could be my inconsistency, bearing in mind I've just had a view about Dr. Faustus and She-Devil. But it just goes to show how never-endingly unlimited, well, that's tautology, isn't it? Never-ending and unlimited, but musical theatre can be, whether it's working on an adaptation or not.
Absolutely.
Colm, thank you very much again for this gallop through some of these shows that are on in Edinburgh this year.
I think next year we should do a minute on every show that we've seen.
That's a brilliant idea.
Or something thereabouts.
Yeah, a timed thing, yeah, exactly. Let's try and do that next year. But for the moment...
See you next year. See you next August.
Yeah, I'm not speaking to you again for 12 months.
Thank goodness.
Senor, Oh, Signor!
Have you heard the news?
What news? About the king?
No, my news is about Queen Isabella.
What? The Queen? Please go on.
Well, she's leading a battalion down the coast. There's a revolt she must contain. Some little twerp won't toe the line. He'll be shown the wrath of Spain.
Ha ha! He's dead. That's the result of disobedience. That fool.
Well said.
That's the result of disobedience.
And now, good sir, what's your news about King Ferdinand?
Oh, so you haven't heard?
No, do tell.
His Holy Inquisition's quite the thing. Seems the new tribunal's going well. Heretics arrested day and night. Soon they all will burn in hell. But first, the stake. That's the result of disobedience.
They'll scream.
They'll bake. That's the result of disobedience.
Better to keep your head down low. Better to bow and fall in line.
Woe comes to men who resist their rightful master.
Better to make the king your friend.
Better to smile and drink his wine. Take what you can and don't court disaster.
Speaking of disaster, look who it is.
Princess Joanna.
I hear she hasn't been to confession in a month.
I heard she's been teaching her servants how to read.
Oh, well, no good will come of that. Good afternoon, Princess.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Or at least it was before they showed up.
How are the wedding preparations coming along? Is everything ready for tomorrow?
Ah, yes, big day for you and the Archduke, and a big night.
Everything is ready. This time tomorrow I shall be married and on my way to Flanders, far away from this tedious conversation.
Well.
Oops, I think I might have upset them. Castile is a land of narrow-minded fools who posture and preen and blindly follow rules. I see them stare. I know they detest my disobedience, but I don't care. That's why I protest with disobedience. Oh dear. Do watch your steps, Signor.
I could say the same for you, Your Highness. A princess ought to smile and be polite. Frankly, she's a real disgrace.
Behaving like that with men of court, she should know her proper place.
Better she learn to hold her tongue.
Better stop acting like a child.
That cheek of hers,
she really should forget it. She ought to renounce her headstrong ways.
Or to be courteous and mild.
Or, mark my words, she'll live to regret it. She'll live to regret it. A princess ought to smile and be polite. Frankly, she's a real disgrace. Behaving like that with men of court. She should know her proper place. My dear, beware. A price must be paid for disobedience.
But I will see.
Take care.
I'm not afraid of disobedience.
A price must be paid for disobedience.
I'm not afraid of
disobedience.
And there we are, as promised, a second song from the Edinburgh Cast Recording from this year, 2025, of The Queen is Mad, a 5-star show. And in that recording you heard Robert Finlayson, Brian Raftery and Maria Coyne. And I have an interview with them and also Tom and Amy, the writers, coming up in a few weeks' time here on Musical Talk, which I'm sure you'll find fascinating. It's always a pleasure to be in the company of creative people. And it was a great conversation that I really enjoyed recording. However, I think that brings us to the end of this episode of Musical Talk. I can offer you no more riches. The cupboard is bare, at least for this episode. So, why not join us again next time? Or whenever. when we'll be discussing, well, who knows what. There's certainly plenty more to discuss about the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and there's an array of interviews coming from the great people behind the great shows that you could have seen there this year. But of course, we'll also be having episodes about other things in musical theatre, current and historic. As I've said before, the world of musical theatre simply gets bigger every day. And so, of course, does the back catalogue of Musical Talk. This is episode 901, after all, which means there are 900 other episodes for you to catch up on before we meet again. And to give you a bit of time to do that, and possibly quite a lot of time is what you'll need, but to give you a bit of time, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for joining me. I've been Thos Ribbits. Pip pip. This episode of Musical Talk, edited by Thos Ribbits and presented by Colm and Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2025, except for the songs where the copyright remains with the original creators. And my enormous thanks go to them for allowing me to play their wonderful songs in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favourite podcasts. And follow us on all the usual social media networks.
Colm, Thos!